Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second to last event in the Tech in the City series. Today's guest, Peter Norton, will discuss the illusionary promise of high-tech driving. My name is Jerica Logan, and I am the Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, otherwise known as CURA. I will be your host for this event. If you require closed captioning, you will find a box at the bottom of the screen called CC. Click the box and select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to see the subtitles during the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar in the Q&A box. We will ask as many of your questions as we can during the last portion of the presentation. And if we do not get to your question, we do apologize. If you have any additional questions following this event, feel free to email me at logan.433@osu.edu. This event is approved for one AICP CM. To claim your CM credits, log into your My APA account in the APA website and enter in your into your event log. There will also be a brief survey at the end of this webinar. If you have time, please provide your feedback. I am now going to pass it over to our director, Harvey Miller.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerica, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series on Tech in the City, looking at the promises and challenges of using technology to solve our urban problems. And this is part of a regular CURA series we've been doing this entire academic year. As Jerica mentioned, this is the second to last webinar in the series. Our next webinar will be on April 21st at noon. And it'll continue on this theme that we're raising today about mobility technology chasing, invented problems, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. And that webinar will be given by Paris Marx. Paris Marx, who the author of the recent book, Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation. Again, that's April 21st at noon. And I also want to just give you a teaser for a webinar series that CURA will be doing this summer. And this is in collaboration with the Ohio State University Research Commons. And the topic will be Race and Place, Learning from the Past and Looking to the Future. And we're going to look at how academic researchers and community activists have shined new light on past discriminatory practices such as restrictive covenants, residential displacement, unfair zoning, biased redistricting, redlining, and urban highway construction, and other things that have happened in our city, and we need to continue to be aware of it and work towards a better future. So we'll have a series of 4 events spanning May through August, and I'll just leave it at that. Just check our webpage, cura.osu.edu/events. You can also like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and I think we're on Instagram, but I never go there, but I think we're there. Plenty of ways to get hold of CURA and find out what's going on in your friendly neighborhood Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at The Ohio State University. So let's get started with today's webinar. I'm really excited about this one. Peter Norton, he's an associate professor of history in the Department of Engineering and Society at the University of Virginia. He's a member of the University of Virginia Center for Transportation Studies and has been a visiting faculty member at the Technical University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. Norton is the author of Fighting Traffic, The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City, a book I highly recommend. And if you take my sustainable transportation course, you'll hear about this, things like the invention of jaywalking. That was never a thing until cars came along. And more recently, and this is why he's here with us today, he is the author of Autonorama, The Illusory Promise of High-Tech Driving. He is the winner of the Usher Prize of the Society for the History of Technology, and he is a frequent speaker on the subject of sustainable and equitable urban mobility. Dr. Norton, I'm looking forward to your talk, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here, and just about there. I'm grateful to Harvey, to Jerica, and to everyone else for the invitation, and also to everyone in the audience for your interest. I think we all share a common interest in a sustainable, affordable, equitable, healthful inclusive future for mobility in the world and in the US in particular. And I think as a historian, I can offer something to this conversation because wisdom, of course, is the product of experience, and we tend to forget our shared experience or even to remember it in erroneous ways. And I'd like to recover the lessons of some of that experience to infuse, I hope, a little bit of wisdom into an intelligence-obsessed era. I chose the photo on the left to begin this talk because so many of our mobility demands are so simple and easy to accommodate. This small protest in Philadelphia is from 1972, and these children, along with grown-ups in their neighborhood, are demanding traffic lights just to slow the cars down so that they can enjoy their local streets safely. Now, one thing that dates this photograph is that we have lost our familiarity with the fact that in past generations, children were expected to have the safe and convenient access of their own local streets on foot and on bikes. And I hope this photograph reminds us of what children have lost, in part through our pursuit of high-tech means of moving people around at the expense of more affordable, more equitable means. This doesn't mean we can't have high-tech. It just means that we have a full spectrum from low-tech, or what I would call high-soc methods, all the way up to high-tech. And we need to draw from that whole spectrum and not just from the high end, as we tend to do. I've got 7 points. I'm going to try to make them each in about 4 or 5 minutes. And I want to start with the right answer to the wrong question is the wrong answer. To illustrate, let me take this advertisement that comes from an era, 1970, when the tobacco companies were responding to what it perceived as threats, namely the scientific conclusion that smoking causes cancer. By then, warning was on the packages of Tareyton and other cigarettes. And so they tried to make the question before us not how do we enable people to cease their habit of smoking cigarettes, but rather how do you make a better cigarette? To which the answer was tech, including a very impressive filter. And it's amazing how many cigarette companies had featured diagrams like this one, promising you that its amazing filter was going to make a better, i.e. a safer cigarette. I think we can recognize that this was the wrong question. In fact, this question contributed to the early deaths of millions of people because of the fact that it distracted the conversation away from the real problem, which was, of course, to reduce smoking. I think we can see almost exactly the same kind of mistake, although it's largely an intentional matter, not just an error, if we change the question to how do you make a better car. If we use the same analogy, we find ourselves up against the same kind of mistaken question leading us to an impressive answer that's actually the wrong answer to the wrong question. It may be the right answer to making an impressive car, but it's not really where we need to get. Yes, there may be a place for high-tech driving, but it won't solve our mobility problems. It will be at most a niche component in a full spectrum approach to better mobility in the future. I want to tell you a short true story. This man gave me his permission to use his name. He's Jacob. I met him when I was talking to the tolling industry in Orange County, California last November in the town of Newport Beach. And the evening before I spoke to the tolling authorities, where I was going to recommend to them that they commit some tolling revenues to alternatives to driving, I had a dinner where the former mayor of the city, Newport Beach, told me that the average home price there was $3 million. And so when I met Jacob in his bike rental shop, because I wanted to rent a bike while I was there, I asked Jacob how he manages to make that work for him. And his answer is an answer I think we haven't really reckoned with enough in our country. So he worked here at this bike shop. This is where I met him, where I wanted to rent a bike, and I rented the bike there. And yet, to make this work for him, because of the home prices in the area, he works here in Newport Beach, but he drives from what they call the interior empire in the Central Valley there to the east. That is a 3-hour total commute if you add up both ways, 70 miles each way. A lot of this is provided at public expense in the form of highways. It is provided at its own expense in the form of road tolls, fuel, maintenance, and vehicle costs. Now, this is a lot of investment, if you can call it that, to make this affordable possibility for Jacob to live in the Inland Empire in Menifee and work every day in Newport Beach. It's also, I think, rather obviously a kind of a crazy way to make this all work. Now, the auto industry is promising Jacob that this 3 hours on the road every day just to get to and from work is going to be great in the future because there'll be no congestion and he won't even have to pay attention to the road because of high-tech driving. But the news on this front is not encouraging, $100 billion and nothing really to show for it yet. This is not to say that tech couldn't do a lot for Jacob. In London, the congestion charge is actually improving people's daily commute by subsidizing public transportation, by reducing traffic congestion on the roads, making public transportation work for people. And when we put this technology to work for us in ways that actually give people more choices, which is what Jacob lacks right now, it really does improve the situation. So tech has a role to play. It's just that tech does not deliver us solutions apart from our needs. And what we need most of all is more choices. So this is the promise. ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assist Systems. This kind of technology certainly has a place, but it's not going to deliver the promises that are made for it. One of the promises that are made for it is that smart systems in the form of sort of digitally enabled devices with that collect data from sensors and drive our systems for us will solve all our problems. This so-called smart mobility or smart city future that's promised to us neglects the fact that the smartest component in any smart mobility system is you, or in this case, Jacob or me when I'm traveling. We are extraordinarily intelligent at moving around. We know what we want better than any system can tell us. We also, when we have the capacity to exercise choice, can, in that case, choose the most affordable or the most convenient system, depending on what we prefer. When people have choices, then our own smarts, which the engineers are still striving without success to emulate, are what empower us. And systems that deprive us of choices also deprive us of the best opportunity for truly smart mobility, which would be mobility where our own intelligence, rather than machine intelligence, makes our determinations for us. Machine intelligence, of course, could supplement this in useful ways, but it is no substitute for the smartest component in any mobility systems, which is us. Now, we used to have choices in this country. My first book that Harvey mentioned briefly is about that world before we prioritized one system at the expense of all of the others. This is Rochester, New York, 1904. You can see that thanks to a very low tech, or I would prefer to say high soc component, namely proximity, people can get around by a lot of different modes. I've circled all the bicycles in red here, so you can just see how many bicycles there are. Those are also electric vehicles in the center of the road, or EVs, but they're affordable. They're only 5 cents a ride each. Yeah, adjusted for inflation, that would be a lot more, but they would still be affordable. These things don't even need batteries because they draw their current from overhead wires. Have a lot of possibilities for the people in here. And when this photograph was taken, people who wanted to pay for a car could already buy one if that's what they wanted. Now, when we mix cars and that kind of world that you just saw in Rochester, you don't get a safe mix driving and pedestrian-friendly mobility don't mix very well, especially if the drivers want to go fast. We can see that in these charts from about 100 years ago from urban America, where not only were deaths rising each year, but also the kinds of people being hit were predominantly pedestrians and even children. Now, the common sense answer at that time was to restrict automobiles and their drivers. Why? Because speed is what made them dangerous, and therefore they would have to be slowed down. Everyone else was using the street as it had always been intended to be used. It was the driver who was making that kind of use dangerous, and that is why you see this kind of pervasive, and it really was ubiquitous, criticism of cars and drivers in city streets. The remedy at that time was to slow cars down, because the common sense of that time is that speed is what makes cars dangerous. This is, of course, incidentally, how Newton would explain the danger of fast driving as well, F equals ma, right? So speed is what makes cars dangerous. The common sense wisdom of that era was to slow cars down. That's why in many cities, including one in Ohio, the ad from the left there is from Cincinnati in 1923. It's for an ordinance that would require motorists to equip their cars with mechanical speed governors that would limit them to a maximum of 25 miles an hour automatically. So that's a tech solution, but notice that it's a tech solution intended to slow cars down, not to make fast driving safe, which is the preferred approach today. This proposal, incidentally, got 42,000 signatures on petitions in its support. It also terrified people, though, who wanted to sell cars. They organized a massive Vote No campaign. These proposals were not just in Cincinnati. They were in numerous cities. Cincinnati's went further than most of the others. And you see in this opposition a recognition among people who want to sell cars that if they want to continue to sell cars and they want a growing market, that means they're going to have to redefine safety from a problem of slowing cars down to a problem of making speed safe. One of the leaders of this sort of effort, this counter-revolution, you might call it, was Edward Merrin. He was in the business of road building. As a road builder, he wanted a future of more driving, not less. He had allies, of course, in automobile manufacturers, also automobile clubs, and they got together to propose what Merrin himself called a radical revision in our conception of what a city street is for. He was editor of Engineering News Record, a journal for road builders, among others. And in that journal, he proposed that this triangle of priorities, where you see walking gets the highest priority, would have to be turned around. And so he proposes to put automobiles as first priority, make walking the last. And he makes this quite explicit in an editorial he wrote in 1922, almost exactly 100 years ago, where he proposed a radical revision of our conception of what a city street is for. That revolution was substantially successful. There's far more to explain about how it worked than I have time to explain, but it involved convincing people that walking in streets was no longer normal. That's not what streets were for anymore. Walking was restricted, and it involved, of course, also teaching children that the street is for autos. A child coloring in the picture on the bottom, and they were supposed to imitate the example on the top. That child's eyes would pass over the street is for autos every time they glanced from the top picture to the bottom. They're learning the lesson that the automobile interest groups wanted to teach them. We've inherited that lesson. Now, one thing that people like Edward Merrin and his allies in road building, in automobile manufacturing, and in other interest groups found is that if you promise a future of perfection, then you can sell roads and cars that are intended to contribute to that future in greater numbers today. Notice that the promoters of high-tech driving, of so-called autonomous vehicles, are doing exactly that today. They're promising perfection. They're not delivering on that promise really at all, but the promise itself enables them to sell more tech and more vehicles today. 90 years ago, that meant selling roads. Edward Merrin The person who called for this radical revision was the president of the Portland Cement Association, the trade association representing the concrete dealers who would make these highways. They promise a future without congestion and with high-speed safety. That is the promise. The promise is that foolproof highways, as the article on the left calls them, will make a future without crashes. We just have to build enough highways everywhere, even in cities. This is why you see this Shell advertisement from 1937 promising a future without crashes, without congestion, delivered by highways right through cities. One of the geniuses behind this effort was Charles Kettering, a vice president of General Motors. I think there's a lot of ways in which he was the Elon Musk of his time. Both of these men are or were promise makers. Neither one had any kind of good record at keeping promises, but they were both excelled at making promises that somehow managed to enlist the support of the people who heard them, even though the promises were never kept. And I think it's worth asking, why did people keep believing these promises? Why do they still keep believing them today? Well, to begin, Charles Kettering called this method keeping the consumer dissatisfied. That was an extremely counterintuitive message that he was offering his business colleagues in this business article from 1929. But his point was this: a dissatisfied customer is a customer with a need that you can promise to meet if you can just convince them that by buying this next thing, they will be less dissatisfied. But if you ever satisfy them, you're going to lose that market. So you keep them sort of on a treadmill of consumption this way. Kettering's favorite metaphor for this was the horizon. Why? Because the horizon always recedes before you as you approach it. So he promised perfection in the form of no crashes and no congestion. And these promises have been recurrent. In my more recent book, Autonorama, I suggest that there have been 4 generations of this. The first 2 actually were called by General Motors Futurama 1 and Futurama 2. The last 2 have never been called Futurama, but I think that they are in effect Futurama 3 and Futurama 4. They are in effect the same technique, invoke state-of-the-art technology to restore credibility to unkept promises. As many of you know, this was done most famously at the first Futurama in the Highways and Horizons pavilion at the New York World's Fair of 1939 to 1940, where invocations of the latest technology like radio electronics, which were sort of equated with magic in the publicity of this era, are used to promise that this kind of future city, which at that time was to be the city of 1960, the city of 20 years in the future, would be perfect, without crashes and without congestion. A little bit of elementary geometry will tell you this can't work, because all those cars, to be any use to their drivers, have to stop somewhere. And when they do, you're going to have a city full of them. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The picture on the right is from Portland, Oregon, 1962. And you can see that if you actually do funnel in that many cars, you really have to erase your city for the sake of the vehicles that are supposed to serve the city. This is all in the name of curing congestion. In effect, it destroys cities, and it destroys them extremely inequitably. This is the Black neighborhood of Detroit in 1959, and this is an expressway through it built in pursuit of this retreating horizon. And I think you can see the same church tower. It's toward the right of the left-hand picture, and in the center of the right-hand picture, this is the destruction of Black Detroit for the sake of overwhelmingly white suburban commuters. We are the heirs of this effort. It was objected to at the time. Jane Jacobs was just one of the many voices calling this madness. But when it was called madness, the response of the people selling it was to say, well, look, all we need to do is get the latest state-of-the-art technology, which by Jane Jacobs' time had become solid-state transistorized electronics, and promise that this new generation of tech, unlike the old radio electronics, is going to finally make this possible. The lesson here is that amazing technology restores lost credibility even when it can't deliver what's promised. Transistors were the tech of the 60s, and it was supposed to make the Futurama promise finally work. You can see that kind of tech enthusiasm in 1968's 2001: A Space Odyssey. The screenwriter behind that movie, Arthur C. Clarke, wrote a really important letter to Science magazine in the same year when he was writing the script. And in this letter, he said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And the key point here is that magic has a way of making us think that things we thought were impossible were possible. It restores credibility. And you can see this equation of state-of-the-art technology in magic in the promotionalism for this generation of Futurama. These transistors are supposed, as the ad on the left says, or the story on the left says, they're going to make driving foolproof, accidents unknown, thanks to science. This gives us Futurama 2, so that even though Futurama 1 was a failure, transistors are going to somehow make this Futurama 2 work. This is General Motors' version of it. Other companies had other versions. This was not just General Motors. Now, people did not all line up behind this. You often hear overgeneralizations about Americans of the mid-20th century welcoming this kind of thing. They often fought it. Alice Lipscomb on the right was part of a successful effort to stop the Crosstown Expressway through Philadelphia. Earth Day, which you see on the left, was an occasion when people were questioning these sorts of promises. Small is Beautiful was a book written in 1973 to argue against that kind of high-tech promise making. But this just means you need a new generation of high-tech promises. And microprocessors came along just in time to legitimize this promise, giving us amazing magic-like tech like desktop computers, and like the first things that most people heard of for which the adjective smart was used to mean sort of digitally roboticized. Smart weapons were used in the 1991 Gulf War. They got massive publicity. This is when people learned that smart means robotic. This is where that adjective first became widely known. It had been used in that sense by engineers for about 20 years, but this is when that word became widely known. It's incidentally when I learned that word in its current usage. Defense contractors, afraid that with the end of the Cold War, they were going to lose their biggest customers, decided, well, look, we'll promise to defeat congestion instead. And companies like Lockheed and Rockwell International, afraid that they were losing market share because of the end of the Cold War, said instead we'll wage war on congestion and wage war on crashes. This is where the smart highway movement comes from. A lot of public money was behind this as well as private money. It achieved basically nothing. I think it's worth calling Futurama 3, though, because it's very much in the tradition of Futuramas 1 and 2, even though it was never called Futurama 3. Here we see a car, it's on a test road in San Diego next to an actual road. And this test driver is holding his hands out the window to show that he doesn't have to use the steering wheel because these cars are following thousands of magnets embedded in the road. What this could actually do to relieve congestion or prevent crashes was anyone's guess, since, of course, all this would really do is cause more congestion as soon as these cars left the highway. In effect, we have the world's least efficient train. But as before, the answer to this is not to give up on this vision if you have the tech to sell in pursuit of this unkeepable promise. What you do instead is you invoke the latest technology again, which by 2007 had become the iPhone. This is an ad for the very first iPhone. And this kind of extraordinary, magic-like, amazing technology sustains promises like this one from ZF, a tech company in mobility on the right. That's from 2020. That same company's predecessor, though, was promising the same thing 60 years earlier. So it's the same promise. It's new technology that's supposed to make it credible. What it will actually do for us, though, is still very much in doubt. This tech, though, was enough to sustain an actual vision of the city of the future. This one's from 2010. It shows us the Shanghai of 2030. I think we could call this Futurama 4. It was a team effort between General Motors and its Chinese partner. And at this pavilion in Shanghai in 2010, exhibit goers saw a promise of a future without emissions, without petroleum, without crashes, without congestion. It was supposed to be a zero emissions, car dependent future. Tech was somehow supposed to deliver this, leaving people free to generate monetizable data to make other companies a profit off of their social media use because they don't have to pay attention to the road anymore. General Motors promises a future of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. This is not just GM, though. This is other companies, too. This is just a particularly striking version of that unkeepable promise. Tech is supposed to deliver it. It's supposed to permit us to be in vehicles enjoying entertainment, generating data that will be monetized. This is a major incentive for so-called autonomous vehicles. It's an incentive also for the partner companies like Intel that is claiming that data is the new oil. People inside the vehicle are the oil well, and our entertainment, games, movies, and work generate the data that are monetizable as this new oil. The vehicles are supposed to be so entertaining that we'll actually spend the night circling the block with our friends, just enjoying all the tech inside the vehicle. This is a real GM ad promising exactly that. You'll just stay in the car because it's so fun, generating all of this very valuable data for other people to profit from. And they promise that this is a vision with zero crashes, zero congestion, and zero emissions. Now, one of the things that's supposed to justify this kind of thing is the notion that Americans have a uniquely close love affair with the automobile. This is an idea, incidentally, that was invented by General Motors to legitimize this car dependency that they were selling us. They have constructed paths for us, and other companies have too, that legitimize the futures they promise. They say that Americans have a love affair with the automobile, and this notion also pervades our official reports, where a supposed preference to drive is ostensibly proved on the basis of the fact that we drive so much, when of course we know that a major reason why people drive is that they have no choices, which means we can't tell what people really prefer. And nevertheless, smart authors of smart reports make that equation, that erroneous equation, all the time. You can find these versions of history everywhere, including at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where in an exhibit called America on the Move, which is in the General Motors Hall of Transportation, you can see a vision of the past that says we got where we wanted thanks to Americans' choices. These versions of the past where the criticism is salient are not in that exhibit, or almost absent from this exhibit. In fact, Americans have protested this past, Americans of the past protested this vision the whole way through. A lot of people have heard about the protests in Europe. What a lot of people don't know is that they have predecessors in America. The picture on the left from Philadelphia in 1953 is just one of many such protests demanding pedestrian-first safe mobility. Most of them were led by mothers. Often children were involved. They were often called baby carriage blockades. This one from the San Fernando Valley of California is demanding safer streets for children. Here's one from Philadelphia. These were all over America. They've been largely forgotten. Here's one from Camden, New Jersey. Now, one of the reasons these parents are demanding change is because in the effort to win a war on traffic accidents, so many highways have been built and so many people are driving that we have actually made it hard to do anything else. Ironically, this has led to a situation where the U.S. has a terrible record relative to other countries if we measure crash deaths as we should on a population basis. And one of the victims of these crashes was Edward Marin himself. This is the man who called for that radical revision that I mentioned earlier. He was killed in retirement in a high-speed highway crash, even though he made a career selling highways as the way to solve crashes. We need tools, not solutions. That was the message of Jane Jacobs in Death and Life of Great American Cities. It was also, incidentally, the message at about the same time of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. Both of these books are about the essential necessity of never mistaking tools for solutions. Tools empower their users. They make their users responsible. Users have to choose the right tool for the job, and they have to choose the job it's for. Solutions ostensibly, and I compare it to a magic wand here, they sort of overpower us. We don't need to be involved. They solve everything for us. That's a very dangerous message. It still is today. Carson and Jacobs said almost exactly the same thing in these chapters of their respective books. Made me wonder, if they had co-authored a book, what would they call it? And I think they would call it "War is the Wrong Metaphor." War can't be won. Whether it's a chemical war against pests, that text is actually from Rachel Carson's book, but you could say the same thing about traffic, and really for very much the same reasons. What we need instead is a second radical revision. The first one is the one that got us into unsustainable, unsafe, unhealthful, inequitable, expensive mobility. A second radical revision is necessary to get us out of it. For that, we need to draw our innovation from the full spectrum of innovation, not just from the high-tech end. We need high-tech. We also need high social, though. That's at the other end of the spectrum, right? That way we can bring walkability back. We can give everything its part in a multi-component system. We can have more than just this high-tech end of the spectrum. We can have the low-tech end as well. That will actually make it possible for children to have this safe and convenient use of their local streets again, or for Jacob to have a choice besides a 3-hour commute every day to work. If he had, for example, proximity, that would be a cheaper way for everybody, him and the public, to have a future that's sustainable, inclusive, healthful, and equitable. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Peter. That was terrific. I mean, if my mic wasn't muted, you would have heard me cheering and laughing at any parts during that talk. That was really, history's fun, isn't it? I mean, I'm really grateful for you just basically, really punched major holes in a lot of myths we have surrounding the automobile and around high tech and Silicon Valley. You'd almost call your talk a work in critical car theory, if we can go there. But
Love it.
You can use that if you want. Let's talk about a few things, and I want to remind the audience that just if you have questions, just put into the Q&A, and we'll get to them eventually. But I'll get things started first. Yeah. So in your book, you talk about, and this is kind of the bigger picture, I think, for what the message is here. In your book, you talk about how mobility systems are complex systems where high-tech innovations don't solve problems, but rather just change problems and disrupt balances and introduce new problems. Can you drill down into that bit? Because that sounds counterintuitive. Maybe you can explain that to our viewers.
Well, I think we have lost an essential distinction. You'll notice that people say the word tool and the word solution sometimes interchangeably. If they want to sell a tool, they're likely to call it a solution because solutions are more impressive to us. But in fact, I take the unpopular position in engineering that no technology is ever a solution, for the simple reason that anything we choose to do, we will continue to need to do it. We will not find anything magical that will end all of our problems. And if we recognize this, then we have a chance of recognizing that we actually have a very large toolbox from which we can choose the right tool for the job. You would never tell a carpenter, for example, that a hammer is a solution because that would suggest to the carpenter that a screwdriver isn't necessary for some kinds of fastening jobs. In fact, it is. One of the reasons we got into trouble is that an automobile is a very useful tool for certain jobs, but if you try to turn it into a solution, it works so poorly for that that you have to actually reconstruct the whole world around its needs so as to make it work as the solution you purport it to be.
So yeah, okay. So here, as we talked before we went live with this webinar, Columbus saw the Smart Columbus Challenge, the Smart City Challenge, and that was something that we did here in Columbus for about 5 years, and there was a big focus on self-driving cars. Here in Central Ohio, we've also studied the Hyperloop for transportation between cities, and now we're talking about advanced urban air mobility. So what is it? Why do you think we keep chasing these new technologies? It doesn't seem to be something that's just about self-driving. It seems to be across like many spectrums of mobility, or a wide spectrum.
I think people who sell things figured out about 100 years ago. I mean, what you're describing has been true in various ways for about 100 years. Before about 100 years ago, this technique of selling had not really been achieved. I mean, you could see versions of it in the person who would sell patent medicines claiming they solve everything. But we have a new generation of that coming along in the 1920s and the 1930s. This is the origins of consumerism, of course, and the genius of the people who want to sell things. The insight that they got was that you can sell more if you promise perfection. If you invent problems that don't exist, or if you transform a sort of minor problem into an enemy to be destroyed and defeated as if in a war, this is how you sell. This is what Rachel Carson was writing about. There's nothing original in this critique that I'm offering. I think if Rachel Carson wrote about our transportation system today, the way she wrote about pesticides in Silent Spring, she would say the same thing. It is the same error. The error is a real problem, whether it's insect pests or difficult traffic conditions. And for a real problem, you need real tools. She had a long list of recommendations about how to make agriculture work. Well, similarly, there's no one solution for mobility. Rather, we need the full spectrum. Unfortunately, you can make the most money at the high-tech end, and this is why the high-tech end gets all the attention.
So you must be familiar with Vision Zero efforts. We have a Vision Zero effort here in Columbus. I'm wondering just what are your thoughts about that?
So Vision Zero, which is a sort of way of approaching traffic that says we should not ever agree that a certain number of deaths is the right number of deaths. The only acceptable answer to the question, what's this acceptable degree of safety, is zero. In principle, I wholeheartedly agree with that. There's a couple of problems that begin in practice. One of them is, of course, that this can become strictly a city's public relations campaign. It's very easy for a city to say we're a Vision Zero city and then not actually do the hard work that it takes to approach zero, meaning zero deaths or even zero serious injuries in crashes. Another hazard with Vision Zero is that it can look like a promise of perfection, and it thereby can become an opportunity to sell unlimited tech in pursuit of a future that can't be achieved. I think what we know from actual experience is that Vision Zero is a good objective if it's approached well, and by that, the best way to approach zero is to flip that triangle around, the one I showed in the talk, where walkability comes first. Other kinds of sort of micro-mobility, whether that's bicycles, wheelchairs, and so on, are also at the top. Then you have transit and so on, with personal individuals in their own cars getting last on the list. I mean, they can be prioritized on rural highways safely, but not in a city. And that's why Vision Zero does make sense. And where cities have had the most impressive results, I think the most impressive result in this respect in the world is Oslo in Norway, where they really have achieved essentially Vision Zero, and they've done it in exactly that way. If you go to Oslo today, people are walking everywhere, and they're riding electric trams everywhere and buses everywhere, and to some extent the subway. But there's very little in the way of cars on the road, with the exception of some taxi cabs and so on.
Right. So it takes like a wholesale effort, not just saying, well, we're going to fix intersections here and there and lower speed limits. We have to completely invert the way we approach our streets, I think is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Jerica because we have some good questions from the audience. So Jerica, take it away, please.
Perfect. So our first question is asking, how can street design be wrestled from the claws of traffic engineers? Columbus often claims that the state and federal traffic design standards keep them from making changes to street design. They're afraid to even put in a rainbow crosswalk because of the dreaded MUTCD. What does major reform look like?
Well, I have to begin by saying I'm not sure it can be done, but I write my books, of course, in the hope that it will be done. And therefore, I'll begin with the assumption that we can possibly achieve this very difficult effort. So, I mean, it begins with recognizing that the MUTCD and state DOT standards and so on are standards with a history. That history is generally not very pretty. A lot of people don't know. In fact, I'm not sure anybody knew until I investigated that our engineering standards when it comes to road design were written for us by people who sell cars. That may sound like a shocking statement, but it's true. You can trace this all the way back to 1925 when the first national traffic engineering authority was funded entirely by the automobile industry. And then the engineering standards that we have inherited from it are with us to this day. So we have to question that these standards are in any sense scientific. They're not. They are political standards. Within a certain narrow political framework, they have a logic that does bear up to, say, quantitative analysis, but only within that constructed framework where they are sort of preconceived to win in any negotiation. So I actually think one of the tools is history. So it's the history that shows that our engineering standards are not scientific. It's only our history that can reveal that, in fact, engineering standards of a century ago were hostile to cars. A very simple, quick illustration of that is in a typical city 100 years ago, if you wanted to drive, you could, but every time you got to an intersection and you wanted to turn left, there was a center post that you had to pass first. And this compelled you to take a right angle left turn, which slowed you down practically to a stop. And if you think, well, that sounds like a way to slow cars down, you're right. That was exactly the point. There were a lot of features that we would today call traffic calming. Some of these features that have been reinvented. You can see intersection designs in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and elsewhere that deliberately make it harder to take a turn at speed. And those rules are there as part of what I hope will be a growing rebellion against those standards. But it's not easy, and it's going to take a lot of teamwork to make it happen.
Thank you. So our next question is asking, can you help us further understand the distinction between concepts of novelty and innovation? How do you see this confusion interfere with making progress to improve mobility?
That's a fantastic question because I work in an engineering school, so I hear a lot of the vocabulary, and you can't miss it really anywhere you go, namely that innovation is always good. And even that when you hear innovation, it's funny how it practically always means only high tech or future tech innovation, when a lot of the best things we can do, like put in a separated bike lane, put in a shelter for a bus stop that's actually means you get shade in the sun and get shelter from the rain. Those kinds of low-tech, high-soc innovations can often yield much more for us at less cost without us having to wait for the hope that tech will be achieved that we don't yet have. And so this is why I would call a lot of what is called innovation is really just high-tech novelty. In other words, impressive stuff, really impressive stuff. I think the bias is due to the fact that from a business point of view, there's a lot more money to be made at the high-tech end of the spectrum. And also the high-tech end of the spectrum makes people believe that promises are credible even when they're not. I don't think you could see the kind of sustained interest, investment, and so on in so-called autonomous vehicles, except for the fact that the tech is so impressive, and it really is incredibly impressive, that it makes us start to believe that impossible things are possible. Amazing technology is amazing, but amazing technology does not make car dependency work. And I think we, as a country that's trying to be democratic to some degree at least, we need to be, as citizens, ready to object to the equation of innovation with high-tech novelty.
Great response. Thank you. Our next question is asking, one area that mobility slash transportation has constantly failed at is providing equitable and functional solutions to disabled people who need personal and community mobility solutions. Self-driving vehicles, whether for public or private transportation, is in an area that could be very realistic to improve this if widely adopted. What is your take on how the disabled community fits into your argument?
Well, I have to begin any answer to that by saying that since I'm not a disabled person, I do not want to pretend that I can speak for disabled people. What I can say, what I can talk about is what's possible now and what's possible in the future. Right now, and I think very irresponsibly, a lot of the promotion for autonomous vehicles is promotion promising a future in which anybody with a disability that precludes driving themselves is going to be able to summon an autonomous vehicle that will take them anywhere that they need to go, and therefore their mobility constraints will be removed. To me, that's an irresponsible promise because the practical technical barriers between us and that future, as well as the cost barriers, are so enormous that if that promise distracts us from acting today with the things we can do today to improve mobility for people with disabilities, then that is an irresponsible and very destructive kind of promise to make. So if we took the money that is going into that promise, going into so-called autonomous vehicles, and put even just a fraction of that money into things that actually work, we could do a lot more. And things that actually work include better transit service, accessible transit service. These can be dedicated services if you need them. They can be services for everybody if those can, and they typically can be adapted to suit the needs of disabled persons. We also need environments where it's possible to live close to where you need to work. As Harvey mentioned, I was a guest professor in the Netherlands, and the center of the city where I worked was so pedestrianized and also included enough residents that it was very common for me to see people with disabilities rolling in their wheelchairs to their destinations without any difficulty, because there wasn't even a curb to go down. There was the pedestrianizing was so extensive that you never even had to cross a street with motor vehicles in it. So there's a lot more we can do for people with disabilities. I think it's actually much of it is also similar to the things we can do for children, which I think is a big neglected demographic in this conversation. We sort of surrendered children's mobility on their behalf, and I'd like to see us recognize our responsibility to give children back the safe and convenient use of at least their own local streets.
Thank you. Our next question asks, are there any use cases where you do think driverless vehicles would be a good solution?
There are such cases, and a lot depends on the costs, because the costs are so high that even if you don't have to buy the vehicle and you treat it like a bus or something like that, typically, if they were to be lucrative to operate and they'd have to make a profit for somebody, presumably, then the ride would be extremely expensive. Certainly, though, there are niche services where this can work, where the supply of drivers is very low, as it is, for example, in Japan. There have been interesting and promising work done on making self-driving buses so that you don't have to hire a driver. There are niche applications such as, for example, connecting somebody who arrives at an airport to their hotel along a dedicated route. Certain kinds of delivery services may be feasible. What all of these have in common is that they are niche applications. And if it's a niche application, that means we're recognizing something very important, which is, excuse me, the difference between a tool and a solution. All tools are useful for certain niche purposes. Solutions are supposed to be useful for everything. If we recognize that automated vehicles are a tool and not a solution, then we actually can do useful things with them.
Great answer. Thank you. Our next question is, who are the people not selling something and what solutions are they proposing?
Well, advocates, people in the public sector, unfortunately, though, a lot of times the people in the public sector are subject to so much influence and pressure from the private sector that they, in effect, become a means by which the private sector pursues its agendas rather than the real public servants that we would wish them to be. My biggest hope is in the kinds of advocacies that we see all over America, where there are walkability advocacies, biking advocacies, transit advocacies, advocacies for social justice in general are often united behind these causes as well. They're the ones that I think have the greatest chance of helping us to make the difference that we need to make. They've actually affected some of the officials' vocabulary. Complete streets began as a term from the advocacies, but it's been adopted to some degree by a lot of state departments of transportation. It was advocacies that got a lot of state officials to stop using the term accident and use the word crash instead. That's another success story coming from the advocacies. In the end, though, I think we as citizens have to insist that if a private company is going to use public streets and roads for its private profit, then we as citizens have the right and the obligation to demand conditions on that business proposition, and that those conditions must be conditions that are equitable for street users and that do not merely serve a privileged fraction at the expense of the rest.
That is perfect. And I think we won't have any time for another question, unfortunately. So I will have pass it over back to Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Jerica, and thanks for answering those questions in audience. Those were all really good questions. Well, thank you. That was a really, I don't want to say, maybe inspiring would be a good way to put it, because it does tell us that, just because we're here now, there's a history to it. Choices were made. They were not our choices necessarily. And that means we can imagine a different future around transportation in cities. And that's part of the reason I find history so inspiring and why I'm a history buff, because I think we have to know how we got to where we are so we know, where we're going in the future. So thank you, Peter. I recommend, again, both of his books, Autonorama, the most recent book, and also Fighting Traffic. And I want to remind you that our next event will be April 21st on a similar theme. We'll talk to Paris Marks, who will tell us about a wide range of mobility solutions and why Silicon Valley's getting that wrong. And again, a reminder about our summer series on race and place, learning from the past and looking to the future, a series of 4 webinars we'll have through May and August. So everyone, take care, be careful out there, and be well. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.